Really quickly, though, I do want to say we got to get to this segment in a second, then we'll go to the post game. But I do think it's important. I mean, can you give me, if you don't mind, give me a couple of minutes and maybe fit it in, though, to like, because we titled tonight's show "The False Promise of Wonkery," and I think that look, if Wonkery means Elizabeth Warren instead of Tim Geithner, then we have a vast, infinite improvement in our politics and our society. But I still think Sanders and Warren are still representing, at least for me, this split. You know, this split that amongst a certain, and again, it's an upgrade. I'm glad at least that this mindset of sort of technocracy is at least going in a good, progressive direction, like Warren represents. So again, I'll keep emphasizing that's an infinite improvement in my estimation. But it kind of reminds me, my God, I hesitate to use this analogy because I dread the phone calls. But we get a lot of calls, and I have even actually a really good friend of mine who has, he wants to talk about nuclear power with regards to dealing with the climate crisis. And I don't even want to get into all of the details of it right now. But the point being is, like, climate is not a technological problem. It's a political and economic one. And of course, technology is part of it, but it's a second order thing. With regards to dealing, like, people, it's great. Elizabeth Warren is generating some really great policies. I think we talked about one earlier that I actually don't think is a good policy with regards to this green military stuff. I have real problems with it. But there's a lot of areas on domestic issues that she's foregrounding really good policy ideas, really good things. And what is going to happen is that, just as with, the Affordable Care Act, for God's sake, which was designed not even as like a good Warren-style policy, but as a grand synthesis that wouldn't offend these incumbent interests. There was an endless amount of money spent to destroy it and propagandize against it and racialize Obama, just as they will obviously attack Warren on her gender and so on. And the point being is, when Sanders gets up there and basically says, look, they took all of your shit, I'm going to get some of it back. And the way we get some of it back is going to involve not only me getting elected president, but basically, and he doesn't say this explicitly because he can't, but if you read between the lines, he's not that far off from saying, like, you need to be making calls, pounding the pavements, be on the streets, making life, just giving them hell in order to do this, because this is a political question. If it was just a question of, oh, we all of a sudden realized the last couple of decades were absolutely horrible for most people across the board. So what we're going to do is we're going to rein in the banks, and we're going to give, we're going to end the insurance industry, and we'll just do that because it's the most rational, ethical thing to do. Great. But that's not how power works. And it just still strikes me that it's starting to really crystallize to me in the Sanders versus Warren case. And even when people go, my God, like, oh, Warren's to the left of Sanders. Of course, you have to totally exclude foreign policy and the military, but you have to just solely be looking at politics as like an algorithmic problem and not a political one. Anyways, that's my spiel. What do you think?
So I'll say this, right? I think that I'm going to lump Sanders and Warren into one bucket for a moment, and then I'm going to sort of make distinctions between them. I'll say this. I think for the past 30, 40, maybe 50 years, going back to Carter, the main project of the neoliberalism and of the Democratic Party specifically has been to separate politics from power, right? Separate how we talk about problems, politics broadly speaking, how we talk about how we, organize resources and how we solve social material problems from like the actual power to solve those problems, right? And they've created, and like I said, talking about the new moral economy of language they created, they wanted to emphasize the first part, like how we talk about problems is what makes us viable, not how not us doing anything about those problems. So what I like about both Warren and Sanders is that both of them are sort of going back to like, hey, you know what, we are going to make power and politics more or less inextricable from one another. Like, I have all these policies that I'm going to go out here, and then they're widespread public policies that are aimed specifically at solving large systemic issues. Now, where I think the difference between Warren and Sanders is even when you have like certain policies of theirs that are, maybe a hair's breadth apart, that hair's breadth is the result of an ideological difference, right? I think, by their own admission, Warren believes in capitalism. She believes that all the problems that we are facing currently right now are excesses of capitalism. They're excesses of the system, not functions, right? And I believe, more or less based, if you believe Bernie, you believe his surrogates, and you believe, sort of the rhetoric coming out of his camp that he hasn't necessarily tamped down, that he necessarily believes that the capitalism is this is the function. Like, this is where we are now.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It's a feature, not a bug, right? And so what I will say, though, about Elizabeth Warren is that she, from a policy standpoint, Wonkery, more or less, she is the best the Democratic Party can do. She is the...
And you're excluding Sanders. When
yeah,
you say
I'm
that.
excluding Sanders.
Gotcha.
She is the best at liberalism, centrist liberalism
Absolutely.
has. Like, from a policy standpoint, I view her more or less as maybe this is sort of an asinine comparison, but she's like the other side of the coin to Obama, right? She's like the opposite Obama. Like, she is a candidate who is running almost 100% on policy after policy after policy, and they are all founded in this idea that the institutions themselves can be repaired to the point in which they curb in the worst excesses of capitalism. And in doing that, she actually provides us a service and saying, okay, here, like, you're actually putting out policies, and they are all sort of within this paradigm of the system is not the problem. It's the bad actors within the system. And we can critique that, when you say green imperialism, or even her policy to sort of tamp down on the maternal death gap between black mothers and white mothers, that exists in many, many places around America, specifically, obviously, I'm talking about. We can look at the very specifics of her policy and say, this is like the problem with your policy. The problem is, like, with these mechanisms is that they are based on the idea that capitalism can be fixed, right? And that's what makes it a problem. If the Democratic Party was serious, if they were serious about sort of, like, let's be honest, about tamping down on the Sanders revolution, the Sanders math, the math political movement, they would be putting all of their power, all of their might behind Elizabeth Warren. They would be saying, you know what, in a head-to-head battle, maybe Elizabeth Warren can be the person who unites the farthest elements to the left of the party with the sort of the centrist elements of the right. We might lose a few Wall Street bankers. We might only pull in sort of like $3 billion for the next presidential campaign versus $4 billion, but at least that would make the viability of our party as like, hey, we are a party that is actually serious about solving your problems, not just talking about your problems.
No, I think you're 100. I think you're 100% right, though. That people that they really reveal themselves when they don't. Yes.
But just to, I guess just to close out that, it's just like, I think that Elizabeth Warren campaign, there's going to be a lot of, she's not doing as well as she should be doing. I think we can both agree on that, at least within, the cabal of assholes who are running. Like, she's not doing better than Beto, or she might be doing better than Beto now.
I think she's doing better than Beto. I mean, to me, again, I'm already, for me, bluntly, I'm just already at the point of like, and I've thought this for a while. I always thought if Biden got in, I thought it was going to be Sanders versus Biden. And I think, frankly, whether it's him or somebody else, it's going to be Sanders versus. So at a certain point, I want the progressive forces to coalesce around Bernie Sanders.
I agree too. But I will say this, right? There are going to be a lot of hot takes, a lot of articles.
But of course she should. I mean, yes, of course.
She should not only be doing better.
Beto or Buttigieg or all these other idiots.
She should be smoking them. And there's going to be a lot of articles explaining why she's not smoking them. And they're going to all have various sort of rationales. And they're all going to be more or less legitimate, right? I think her gender plays a role. I think, for sort of the centrist critique that was her gender is going to play a role, obviously. Maybe people are going to bring up this sort of like her weird rollout with the random like fact sheet website that was kind of weird. Right. Maybe people will even go into like the fact that she didn't run in 2016, so people feel like weird about that. More or less ranging on the area of legitimacy. Where I think that people are not going to be really engaging with is that the Democratic Party and their sort of most ignited base, that sort of liberal centrist, not like sort of the far left base, like it's coalescing around Sanders, but like the centrist base who's coalescing around Biden and Biden and Kamala or Kamala, Buttigieg, who have a random flavor of the month every week. It's like they have been conditioned by the last 30 years to not view policy, like the kind of campaign Elizabeth Warren is running, a policy-heavy campaign, as like a legitimate type of campaign. They are just used to a more sort of ethereal series of symbolic gestures, right? Like they are used to, insofar that she is a wonk, she is a real wonk. Like Elizabeth Warren, for all she's not a fake Paul Ryan wonk.
First of all, she's 100% a real wonk, but I think that wonkery is its own symbolic language in today's politics. And I think that, again, there is a tendency, and of course, I mean, the really extraordinary thing is the fact that people call Buttigieg a wonk when he doesn't talk about policy at all, and they substitute the trivial qualities they're obsessed with in him, like the fact that he speaks 5 languages, over what Warren is actually doing. Warren is actually doing Wonkery. But again, what concerns me is I don't think Wonkery is a substitute for really understanding how power works and saying, and I think where Bernie is actually some type of socialist is I think he actually understands that literally the only way to even get the type of agenda that Warren is talking about to even be remotely possible is to have such a relentless countervailing force to oligarchy in this country that's those crowds he generates. I mean, that's filling a stadium in Augusta or wherever. That's, before the campaign's barely even begun, filling a stadium in LA. I mean, and I think that there's a contingent of people, though, particularly in like the wonk class, who are fixating on this like policy for policy's sake question. And that's great. That's better than language symbolism. But those policies are still not going to mean a damn thing either if you don't actually have a real strategy for reorienting how power works. Sanders does that.
So here's where I agree with you, right? And so I think I want to, bring up what Nate Silver said, right? That he said that, policy is not something that interests, more he meant poor people. He was like, he said like, policy appeals to like the elites and the journalists, basically he meant like policy doesn't, poor people don't care about policy, people of color don't care about policy. It's like only like, the big brained media people and, political class care about policy, right? And so here's where I would make that distinction. It's like people who don't exist within that sort of wonk class world of like lanyard boys and, DC elite thinkers. It's like they don't care about policy, big P, as like you said, as a symbol, of like means testing and all these sort of like the complexity of policy as a stand-in for moral righteousness or intellectualism, right? Which can also be indexed by just being someone like Pete Buttigieg, which like I speak 5 languages and I look like
and
the mayor of
It doesn't even matter
Whoville.
that he doesn't do policy. It's like, well, obviously
he looks smart.
Harvard, he looks smart. He speaks in a nerdy way, so of course he's smart.
And of course, when you sort of have that like that sort of really shallow understanding of smartness, you're going to by necessity like loop in random like misogynistic and racist things. Like of course he looks smart. Like he looks like he's a politician, right? Like, he looks like one. He looks like the mayor of Whoville, like I said before, but like he looks
like Alfred E. Newman.
He looks like a character on that old.
I think Trump already took care of that one.
He looks like a character on that old Adult Swim show, Moral Oral.
It looks like the old Adult Swim show, Moral Oral.
But I think that I hate to say poor people, but people who lack the ability to vote entirely on symbolic gestures. And then he made funny enough, he made the point like, oh, people like that are voting all on identity. Like they that's a big issue for them. Like it's not really. It's like if that were the case, Kamala Harris would be doing better than Joe Biden in the black community. She's not.
I think you're totally. I think substance of. Are you going to come and actually do something about the crisis we're in? Yes.
They care about policy.
But that's not symbolic representation. Yeah. That's real.
They care about policy as like a way to solve problems.
Right.
And I think like that's where we've lost it. Going back to power separated from politics. Like they people who have real problems, not to be like crass, like they care about how your policies are going to affect those problems. They don't care about like the sort of the complex math behind them.
Right.
And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they don't have the time.
They don't have time.
They're not, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Some people don't have time to break down batting average
stats because they're not being paid to.
Yeah, that's not being paid to do that. Exactly.
It's like, but yeah. So I mean, I will say I think that there is this absolutely right. There's this symbolic value to the big P policies that Elizabeth Warren is putting out there, and you can sort of see it not only in elements of the center, but elements of the left who are sort of more or less like her, where it's like you like the idea that she has a plan for everything, but you're not reading the plans. It's like you're not actually you like the like the existence of a plan, and I do too because it allows me to sort of critique them, and by nature critique liberalism at its most crystallized form, like written in paper. Here's what liberalism has to say about black mothers dying. Here's what it has to say about the climate. Here's why it's a problem, and here's what we need to do move towards socialism or communism or anarcho-primitivism or whatever.
Right.
And see, that's helpful to us on the left, versus like a Biden or Buttigieg who's like, I'm going to do something about racism or I'm going to do something about the climate. It's like you just got to believe me. You got to believe me, and I'll put it down. I don't want to bog you down with the minutia.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time
and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.